So for this project, you're going to need your PIR sensor from your Freenove kit that looks like a little disco ball on the top. You're going to need your breadboard with your GPIO extension attached, a 220 resistor, an LED, and then a few male-to-male jumper cables. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is this PIR sensor, and if you turn it over to the back, let me focus the camera a little better, there we go. Okay, you have a few different things here that we want to take a look at. So when you face it this direction, you have two little knobs here that you can turn with a Phillips head screwdriver, and this one, if we orient it this way, so this one is the one closest to this little yellow plastic cap. So this is your sensitivity adjustment, and you can turn it clockwise or counterclockwise to change the distance at which it'll pick up movement. So if you go clockwise as far as you can, then that's going to be its least sensitive, so that's going to be 3 meters distance. If you go counterclockwise, okay, that would be its maximum sensitivity, which I think is 7 meters. So for what we're going to do, we don't need to have motion all the way across the room. So we're going to set it all the way clockwise as far as it'll go, and that'll be 3 meters of sensitivity. Okay, the next one over, that's your time delay adjustment. So we can adjust that to make it really quickly, when it senses motion, send a message back to the PI, or we can put a delay on there so that there's a pause or a break of some time between each sensing of motion being reported back to the Raspberry Pi. So if you turn it fully clockwise, right, that's going to give you the longest possible delay, and that would be 300 seconds, which is a lot of delay, right? So if we were to turn it this way, we would get the maximum, which is 300. Okay, we're going to turn it all the way counterclockwise instead to keep our time as short as possible, which is 3 seconds. So we have our distance sensitivity set to highest and our time sensitivity set to the lowest. Okay, the next thing that we're going to look at, if you reposition it this direction, is there's this little yellow plastic cap here that you can ever so gently wiggle free, and that will show you the 3 pins that are poking up here behind that plastic cap. Okay, these help you set the trigger jumper. So if you set it to a single trigger, okay, that means that the sensor is going to send a signal when it detects motion just once, right, within that delay time, and it won't send another signal until the delay time is over. If you do repeat trigger mode, every time it senses motion, it's going to send a signal to the Pi, and then it's going to reset the timer and start over again. So if you cover up with your plastic sleeve the first 2 pins and then snap that down into place, okay, the first 2 pins being covered exposes the 3rd pin. That's the repeat trigger. Okay, if you want to do a single trigger so that it only sends 1 alert in each cycle of the timer, you would remove that plastic sleeve, slide it over so that the first pin is exposed, and that would be your single trigger. Okay, for what we're going to be doing, I would recommend leaving it on the H, the repeat trigger. Okay, now, if we turn the PIR sensor over, you can slide your fingernail underneath of that ledge on the plastic cap, and you can pull the little cap off of the disco ball, and then you'll see when you turn it here, these 3 pins that are on the back, okay, they're labeled on the front here. So this pin furthest to the right is your ground. See, it says GND for ground. Okay, then the middle pin is labeled out, and the one furthest on the left, right, that one is going to be the pin that's powered. So we're going to send the power in to that one on the left. So if you get your jumper cables, I'm going to use black for ground. So I look for the ground label, and then I'm going to plug the female lead of my jumper onto that ground pin. Okay, the out, I'm going to use yellow. So I'll put the yellow lead in the middle, and then I'm going to use red for the power. So that's going to go on the 3rd pin. Okay, so now we have our jumper leads attached. Now for the breadboard, let's see if I can focus this. There we go. So on the breadboard now, the black wire, remember I made that for ground. So I need to plug that into any one of my ground pins. So any of these that say G and D, right, would be ground pins. So we're going to ground the PIR sensor. Then the red cable, okay, this was our power pin, and we're going to send that one to a power source. So 5 volts would be one of these top 2 pins. So now I'll have 5 volts of power going into my sensor. Okay, and then the yellow, that's the output. That's going to send the signal when it senses motion back to the Pi. So I need to give this a GPIO pin so that we can tell the Raspberry Pi where to find that input. And I'm going to use GPIO pin 4. So I'm going to slide this ground out of the way so I can get to my pin 4. Okay, so now I've got my yellow on GPIO pin 4, and then I can just move my ground over to another ground so it's not in the way. Okay, so then once it's all wired up, you can put that plastic top back onto your motion sensor. Okay, and the sensor is most sensitive around the sides and less sensitive vertically. And so I'll lay that over here and my wires to bend. There we go. I'm going to put that off to the side. Okay. So now before we mess with the LED, I'm going to go into my Scratch program and we're going to test the motion sensor to make sure that it's reading correctly. So let me do this over here so you can see the screen. There we go. So I've already brought in my Raspberry Pi GPIO extension. So when I click on that, I have blocks now in Scratch for sensing the input from those Raspberry Pi GPIO pins. And I set my pin now to 4. So I'm going to go ahead and change these to a 4. Okay, so when we click the green button, so I'm going to hit stop here. When we click the green button, it's going to set the GPIO pin number 4 to input pulled low. Okay, then we're going to have it tell us you moved the sprite when it registers high, and it's going to say you're sitting still when it registers as low. Okay, so when I hit run, hey, we need to be still and let the sensor acclimate to the environment. So we're just going to let it sit here for a little bit. Sometimes it can take up to a minute for your sensor to adjust to its environment. Okay, now that it's adjusted, okay, I'm going to see if I can get my sensor on my code in the same window here. So there's my sensor. Okay, and it says that I'm sitting still. So now I'm going to move my hand over it, and now the sprite says you moved. Okay, now it says I'm still. Now I'm going to wave my hand, and it registered that I moved. Okay, so now I know that my sensor is working, and it's picking up the motion of my hand as I move around.